A new UN-backed report says we're facing some of the worst drought conditions ever recorded. It blames climate change, El Nino, and years of poor water planning. The report warns this is not just a dry season, it is a global crisis. For a closer look, we reached Anabela Bonada earlier this morning. She's the managing director of climate science at the Intact Centre on Climate Adaptation at the University of Waterloo.
Good morning, Loren.
Thanks very much for doing this. How serious is the global drought situation this year?
It's extremely serious and widespread. So what we're seeing is, for the last few years, we've had the warmest years ever recorded, 2023, 2024, and that's really leading to water shortages, which also lead to food insecurity, power outages, and of course, public health challenges. Several regions of the world are experiencing some of the worst droughts they've seen in decades, and they're ongoing year after year. And this is having a real big effect across the globe. So even though it's quite regional, for example, Eastern and Southern Africa have over 68 million people that require food assistance. That's about double almost the population of Canada. So even though it's having some major issues in those areas, of course, it's really impacting the rest of the globe as well.
Yeah. How would you assess the situation across the country in Canada?
So even though Canada wasn't highlighted in this report as a drought hotspot, we're actually having quite a bit of issues with drought. So the prairies have seen worsening drought over the last 10 years. So drought year after year, and with each year it does get worse as it becomes more over the last one. And what that's having is having an effect on the crops, for example. So the crops are stunted. Some of them can't be used for the production that they would have in the past, so they go to animal feed. Pastures are drying up. Hay yields are declining by about 50%. And of course, this is having a real effect on the cattle. It's having an effect on farmers, and it's a trickle-down effect that we as consumers end up seeing in our food prices.
Now, what is driving this cycle of drought, and how much of a factor is climate change in this?
Yeah, so there are, multiple compounding factors that lead to this kind of extensive drought. One of them is climate change. So over the past few years, we've had those warmest years on record. We had the El Nino event in 2023 that was quite strong, and it led to having precipitation in some areas, but not in others that would have needed it. We have other conditions as well. So the way that we use our water resources, we're not very good at it. We need to conserve a bit more. We have aging infrastructure, and of course our response system. So we tend to respond to these drought conditions instead of prepare for them ahead of time. But just going back to climate, climate is having a major effect here as it helps dry out the soil even more so.
Can you explain, people on the prairies here know well about, the effect drought would have, for example, on food producers and, agriculture, farmers. How is this drought affecting global food supplies?
It has a major issue because we all actually rely on some of the crops that come from other countries. So, for example, some staple crops such as maize, wheat, rice, barley, which we find in so many of our foods, have failed these crops in multiple regions. For example, in Southern Africa, over 2 million hectares of crops have been damaged. Spain and Morocco saw a significant yield decline in their grain production. And so, of course, this leads to a global crisis. Not only are people in those countries, highly and acutely impacted and having, no food availability for their own residents, but we see impacts for us here. So the shipping cost increase and there are shipping issues with the Panama Canal. And the food prices increase for us here as well. And if there's less food, there's just less food to go around.
What is the forecast on this? In the coming years, I suppose, around drought?
Yeah. So unfortunately, what climate change does, apart from all the other factors, so, our aging infrastructure, increased population, Climate change is projected to only get worse if we don't make any changes to our lifestyle. So if we don't reduce our emissions, we're going to see increased temperatures. Those increase in temperatures that are already happening, and as they get worse, can lead to more drought, to extended periods of drought, and more frequent droughts, and drought in areas that we haven't seen it before. So if we continue living our lives as is, we should expect to see these drought conditions to continue to get worse and impact us more and more so locally. Just as you mentioned, in the prairies, there's already having an effect. Some areas of BC have already seen drought conditions. And just as a reminder, drought also leads to more wildfire and also more of this flash flooding that we're hearing about that's happening in other places as well as here.
Yeah. How are you thinking about preparation? I mean, governments, communities, individuals.
Yeah, there's a lot that can be done, and I think the preparedness is a key. It's doing everything we can before things happen. So locally, there's a lot that we can do here as Canadians in our communities. Reduce our water usage, convert our lawns to drought-tolerant, drought-resistant plants that don't need that much watering, and so that we don't have lawns that just need water all the time. How we wash our cars. We don't need to wash our cars continuously. How we use water in our home. So think about water conservation for yourself. But also on the bigger scale, as countries, we need to work together with other governments, sharing climate data, sharing projections, also funding in order to upgrade infrastructure. Because as I mentioned, if these other countries that feel very far away from us continue to experience drought, we will very much directly feel the impact of food availability, food insecurity, and food prices.
Yeah. All right, Anabela, thank you very much for speaking with us this morning.
Yeah, thanks again for having me.